She wanted a baby more than anything in the world, but the man who showed up and offered her one wasn't her husband. Elena Whitmore stood on her porch, the dust of Cedar Ridge clinging to the hem of her dress. For 3 years her world had been silent, the silence of an empty nursery, the silence of doctors shaking their heads, the silence of her husband Thomas's unspoken disappointment. At 29, she was a beautiful woman living a half-life, haunted by the word the town whispered behind her back. Barren. Then he rode in. He wasn't from around here. You could tell that from a mile away. Tall, bronze-skinned, with eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the desert. He moved with the kind of grace that was both beautiful and dangerous. An Apache warrior. Right here in Cedar Ridge. He stopped his horse directly in front of her house, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He dismounted and walked toward her. The whole town was watching now. Old Mr. Jameson stopped sweeping. Mrs. Henderson peeked through her curtains. This stranger's presence was an event, a disruption in the slow, predictable rhythm of their lives. His voice was deep, like the rumble of distant thunder. "I'm looking for Elena Whitmore." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I am Elena Whitmore." "My name is K.A. Strongbear," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "The spirits of the forest have sent me to you. They told me of your sorrow, and they told me how to end it." Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. This man spoke of spirits and sorrow as if they were old friends. He claimed to know the deepest ache in her soul. She should have been afraid. She should have screamed for Thomas, who was just down the street at his general store, oblivious. But she didn't. Instead, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. And that was the most dangerous feeling of all. What he said next would shatter her world, forcing her to choose between the life she had and the one she desperately prayed for. Would you have listened, or would you have slammed the door in his face? "We should speak privately," K.A. said, his gaze sweeping over the nosy neighbors. Every instinct told Elena to refuse, to wait for her husband. But a deeper, older instinct, the one that longed for a child's touch, made her nod. My garden. Behind the house. It was her sanctuary, the one place where she could coax life from the dry earth. As she led him past rows of blooming flowers and budding tomatoes, the sounds of the town faded away. Here, it was just the two of them, and the setting sun painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began, his voice softer now, "I know of your struggle, the empty cradle, the tears you cry when no one is watching." Elena gasped, stumbling back. How could you possibly know that?" "My grandmother is a seer," he explained, his expression one of profound respect. "She dreams of things that are and things that will be. For months, she has dreamed of you. A woman with hair like autumn leaves and eyes the color of the sky, her heart breaking because her body will not give life." The description was so perfect, so intimate, it stole the air from her lungs. This was beyond gossip. This was something else entirely. This is impossible. I'm a Christian woman. I don't believe in visions." "I'm not asking you to abandon your God," K.A. said, his eyes intense. "I am telling you that sometimes he answers prayers in ways we do not expect." He took a step closer, and the space between them crackled with an unspoken energy. "My grandmother's dream was not just of your sorrow. It was of a child, a special child, born to bridge the gap between our two peoples, a child of peace." Elena's mind was reeling. A child of peace? Bridging two worlds? It sounded like a fairy tale, a myth whispered around a campfire. And then he delivered the final, impossible blow. "She dreamed of how this child would be conceived," he said, his voice dropping to a low, steady murmur. "The spirits have chosen me as their vessel. They have sent me to you. 3 nights from now, under the light of the full moon, if we come together, you will have the son you have prayed for." The world stopped spinning. The birds went silent. All Elena could hear was the frantic, terrified drumming of her own heart. He wasn't just talking about visions and spirits. He was asking her to commit the ultimate sin, to betray her husband, her vows, everything she believed in. He was offering her a miracle. but the price was her soul. Adultery, she whispered, the word tasting like poison on her tongue. You are asking me to commit adultery. I am asking you to accept a gift, Ka corrected gently. A chance to fulfill the deepest desire of your heart, to give your husband the family he longs for. Elena's carefully constructed composure shattered. You know nothing about my husband. I love him, she cried, pacing the small garden like a caged animal. This is madness. Is it madness to want to hold your own baby? He countered, his voice calm in the face of her storm. Is it madness to see a door open when all others have been closed to you? I have seen the way you look at the other children in this town. It is a physical pain. I am offering you a cure. And what's in it for you? She shot back, her voice dripping with suspicion. What do you get out of this arrangement? I get to fulfill my purpose, he said simply. My grandmother taught me that our lives are not our own. We are here to serve a greater plan. If this child is conceived, he will be yours and your husband's. I will ride away from this town, and you will never see me again. I will be a ghost in your past. She stared at him, searching his face for a hint of a lie, a flicker of deceit. She found nothing but a profound, unnerving certainty. It was this certainty that terrified her more than anything. He believed every word he was saying, and a small, treacherous part of her was starting to believe him too. I need to think, she said, her voice shaking. Ka nodded, understanding. The full moon is in 3 days. I will be camped by the creek, a mile north of town. If you decide to trust this path, meet me there. If not, I will be gone by sunrise the next day. No one will ever know I was here. He turned to leave, but Elena's voice stopped him. Why me? Why did your grandmother dream of me? Ka paused, looking over his shoulder. The last rays of sunlight caught the sharp angles of his face. Because your heart is good, Mrs. Whitmore, and because sometimes the greatest miracles require the greatest courage. He walked away, his form melting into the twilight, leaving Elena alone in her garden. Her hand, as it so often did, went to her flat stomach. 3 days. She had 3 days to make a choice that could either build a new world or burn her current one to the ground. She looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. She had prayed to those stars, to the God above them, for years. Was this stranger his answer, or was he the devil in disguise? The next day was a special kind of hell. Every tick of the clock was a countdown to the full moon. Every chore, every routine, felt like a lie. Elena moved through her home like a phantom, her mind miles away at a camp by a creek. Thomas knew something was wrong. He wasn't a fool. Elena, he said at breakfast, his kind eyes clouded with worry. You've been distant. Is something troubling you? She wanted to scream, to confess everything and let the pieces fall where they may. But how could she tell her good, decent husband that she was considering sleeping with a stranger based on a vision? How could she explain that their shared tragedy had pushed her to the edge of an abyss? Just tired, dear, she lied, the words feeling like ash in her mouth. The lie didn't sit right. It festered. It grew. After Thomas left for the store, the town gossip, Mrs. Henderson, appeared at her gate. I couldn't help but notice that Indian man, speaking with you yesterday, Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes gleaming with a predatory curiosity. Looked rather intimate, if you ask me. He was asking for directions, Elena said, her voice sharp. I was being a good Christian and helping a traveler. The encounter rattled her. It was a stark reminder of the world she lived in, a world of judgment and suspicion. If she met K.A., she would have to be invisible. But it was more than that. Mrs. Henderson's casual cruelty, her use of the word savage, ignited a protective spark in Elena. K.A. had shown her nothing but respect. The town, for all its Christian piety, had shown her nothing but pity and scorn. Later that day, she couldn't take the silence anymore. When Thomas came home for lunch, she confronted the ghost that haunted their marriage. Thomas, she began, her voice trembling, if there was a way, a chance for me to have a child, would you want me to take it, no matter how unconventional? Thomas froze, his fork hovering over his plate. What are you talking about, Elena? One of those traveling medicine men again? They just take our money and sell us false hope. No, she said, her heart pounding. Something different. She took a deep breath. She had to know. She had to know if she was facing this choice alone. This is about the man who visited yesterday. He believes he can help us. Thomas's face hardened. Help us how? And so, she told him. She told him about the dreams, the prophecy, the full moon. She told him about the impossible offer. She watched as his kind face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally a deep, soul-crushing hurt. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Adultery, he finally choked out, the word a death sentence for their marriage. You are considering adultery. I'm considering giving you a son, she cried, the desperation of 3 long years pouring out of her. What if this is God's answer, Thomas? A strange, unexpected answer, but his answer nonetheless. God's answer is for my wife to sleep with another man? He roared, slamming his fist on the table. The plates jumped. The sound echoed the shattering of their life together. That's blasphemy, Elena. Listen to yourself. I'm desperate, she screamed back, tears streaming down her face. I am dying inside, Thomas. A little more each day. I see the way you look at me. I know I failed you. His anger suddenly evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked pain. You have never failed me, Elena. Never. But you want a child, she whispered. You want a son to carry on your name. Don't lie to me. I see it every time you look at the neighbor's children. He couldn't deny it. The truth hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Yes, he admitted, his voice ragged. I want a child, but not like this. Not at the cost of your soul. Not at the cost of us. He walked to the window, his back to her. If you do this, Elena, it changes everything. There is no coming back from it. She knew he was right. This wasn't a secret she could keep. It was a fault line that would run through their lives forever. But the alternative was a slow death, an empty house, a silent future. He turned back to face her, and what she saw in his eyes made her blood run cold. It wasn't just pain. It was a flicker of something else. Something dark. Something she had never seen before. What the doctor said, he began, his voice barely a whisper. About you, being barren. There's something I never told you. Elena's heart stopped. A secret? Thomas didn't have secrets. He was an open book, a good, simple man. Wasn't he? What is it, Thomas? She asked, a new kind of dread coiling in her stomach. What didn't you tell me? He looked at her, his eyes filled with a guilt so profound it seemed to age him 10 years and 10 seconds. The doctor in St. Louis, he said, his voice cracking. He spoke to me privately, after he spoke to you. The air grew thick, heavy. Elena felt like she was underwater, the pressure building in her ears. She could see his lips moving, but the words seemed to come from a great distance, distorted and unreal. He said the problem, it wasn't you, Elena. It was never you. It was never you. The 4 words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Elena stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth as she sank into a chair. The floor felt like it had dropped out from beneath her. Her entire life, the central tragedy that had defined her for 3 years, was a lie. What are you saying? She whispered, though she already knew. She could see the devastating truth in his tear-filled eyes. It's me, Elena, Thomas confessed, the words torn from him. I'm the one who's barren. The doctor told me, and I was a coward. I was ashamed. I couldn't bear the thought of the town looking at me with pity, whispering about me. So I let you take the blame. I let everyone believe it was you. The silence in the room was a roaring void, the carefully constructed world Elena had lived in, a world of her own tragic inadequacy, crumbled into dust. The pain, the shame, the guilt she had carried. It wasn't hers. He had given it to her. He had let her wear it like a shroud while he hid behind his lie. You let me believe I was broken? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The grief was so immense it had burned past tears, leaving behind a cold, hard rage. You watched me wither away. You listened to me cry myself to sleep at night, knowing it was your lie that was killing me. I love you, he pleaded, taking a step towards her. I didn't want to lose you. Lose me? She scoffed, a bitter, hollow sound. You lost me the day you decided your pride was more important than my heart. You've been living with a ghost, Thomas. The real Elena died a long time ago, and you were the one who killed her. Everything was different now. Ka's offer was no longer just about a desperate woman's desire for a child. It was about something else. Justice, maybe. Revenge, even. Thomas had built their marriage on a foundation of deceit. What did she owe him now? What did she owe a man who had let her suffer for his own shame? The choice was no longer about faith versus sin. It was about freedom versus a cage built of lies. That night she didn't sleep. She lay beside her husband, a stranger whose breath was a testament to his betrayal. The full moon was tomorrow, and her decision, once so complicated, was now terrifyingly simple. She wasn't going to the creek for Thomas. She wasn't going for a prophecy or for the spirits of the forest. She was going for herself, to reclaim the life he had stolen from her. But what she didn't know was that K.A. Strongbear had his own secrets. The prophecy he spoke of was real, but he had left out the most important part, the darkest part. The part that said the child born of two worlds would not just bring peace, it would demand a sacrifice of blood to do it. The moon was a perfect silver dollar in the black velvet sky. The path to the creek was bathed in its ethereal light, twisting through the trees like a ghostly serpent. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded like a judgment. Elena moved through the woods, a woman walking toward her own destiny, leaving a life of lies behind her. She found him waiting, a silhouette against the shimmering water. He wasn't surprised to see her. It was as if he had known all along that she would come. I was not certain, he said, his voice a low murmur that blended with the sound of the creek. I was, Elena replied, her voice steady and clear. The turmoil of the past few days had settled into a hard, cold resolve. But not for the reasons you think. He tilted his head, his dark eyes studying her in the moonlight. He could see the change in her. The fragile, sorrowful woman was gone. In her place was someone forged in the fire of betrayal. Your husband, K.A. stated. It wasn't a question. He told me the truth, she said, the words falling flat in the cool night air. It was him. He was the barren one. He lied to me for 3 years. K.A. nodded slowly, a deep understanding in his gaze. A man's pride can be a powerful poison. He paused, his eyes holding hers. Does this change why you are here? It changes everything, she said. Before I was coming to get something for him, for us. Now I am here to take something for myself, a life, a future, something that is mine and mine alone. His expression grew serious, a shadow passing over his face. You must understand, Elena, this is not a simple act. This is a ritual. It is older than this town, older than your God. It requires more than just two bodies coming together. It requires a focused will, a shared purpose. He gestured to a small clearing by the water's edge. A flat stone lay in the center, and on it were arranged several items she didn't recognize. A single eagle feather, a bowl of water, a pinch of yellow pollen. It was an altar. The spirits do not give such a gift lightly, he continued, his voice taking on a formal, solemn tone. They demand to know our intent. The prophecy speaks of a child who will bridge two worlds. It is a great destiny, but it comes with a great weight. You must be prepared to carry it. Elena felt a shiver of apprehension. This was more than she had bargained for. This wasn't an act of passion or revenge. It was, as he said, a ritual, something sacred and, perhaps, dangerous. What must I do? She asked. You must clear your heart of all but one desire, he instructed. Not anger at your husband, not sorrow for your past, only the desire for the child. You must want this life more than you have ever wanted anything. You must call to its spirit and invite it into you. Can you do that? She thought of the empty nursery, the tiny clothes she had bought and hidden away, the lullabies she hummed to an empty room, the raw, primal ache in her soul. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I can do that. He took her hand, his skin warm and firm against hers. He led her to the water's edge. Then let us begin. What happened next was not an act of love, nor was it an act of sin. It was something more elemental. Under the watchful eye of the moon, guided by ancient words whispered in the Apache tongue, they entered into a covenant not with each other, but with the unseen world. It was a joining of purpose, of desperate hope, and of shared sacrifice. As the first light of dawn threatened the eastern sky, Elena knew her life was irrevocably changed. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. As she dressed to leave, a cold thought entered her mind. You said the prophecy was about a child of peace, she said, looking at K.A. Is that all it said? K.A. was silent for a long moment, his back to her as he stared at the fading stars. He seemed to be weighing his words, or perhaps his conscience. When he finally turned to face her, his eyes were filled with a gravity that chilled her to the bone. No, he said slowly, that is not all. The prophecy also says this: the one who is born of two bloods but owned by none will walk the path of peace. But this path must first be cleared, and the toll for clearing it is the life of the one who tells the first lie. The life of the one who tells the first lie. Thomas, the prophecy wasn't just about creating life, it was a death sentence. Elena stumbled back to town in a daze, the prophecy echoing in her mind. The life of the one who tells the first lie. It was a riddle wrapped in a thread. Thomas's lie was the foundation of her entire ordeal. Did this ancient prophecy really have the power to reach into their lives and exact such a terrible price? She slipped back into the house before the town was awake. Thomas was still asleep, his face looking strangely peaceful. A wave of nausea washed over her. Looking at him, all she could see was a dead man walking. The rage she had felt was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying dread. Had she, in her quest for a new life, condemned her husband to death? The weeks that followed were a torment. Every day she expected something awful to happen. A stray horse, a hunting accident, a sudden sickness. Thomas, for his part, seemed to be trying to atone. He was tender, attentive, treating her like fragile glass. He confessed his secret to no one else, trapping them both in their shared knowledge. His guilt was a third person in their marriage, silent and suffocating. Then 3 weeks after her night at the creek, Elena's monthly courses failed to arrive. A fragile, terrifying hope began to bloom in the wasteland of her heart. She said nothing to Thomas. This secret was hers alone. Another week passed, and another. She was never late. One morning she couldn't contain it any longer. Thomas, she said at the breakfast table, her voice trembling, I'm late. He looked up, his eyes widening. For the first time in weeks, a genuine light flickered in their depths, a desperate, hungry hope. He opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. Don't, she said, her voice sharp. Don't say anything. We will not speak of it. She could not bear to share this with him, not yet. Not when a prophecy hung over his head like a hangman's noose. But the secret couldn't be kept forever. As the months passed and Elena's belly began to swell, the town started to talk. They called it a miracle, a blessing from God after so many years of prayer. Elena and Thomas played their parts, accepting the congratulations with forced smiles. Thomas was ecstatic, the shadow of his guilt momentarily forgotten in the joy of impending fatherhood. He saw it as a sign of forgiveness, a second chance. Elena saw it as the ticking of a clock. The town preacher, Reverend Miller, made their miracle the subject of his sermons. He was a severe man, with a face like chiseled granite and eyes that saw sin in every shadow. He spoke of Elena's piety, of her unwavering faith being rewarded. Elena felt like a hypocrite, a fraud sitting in the front pew, her very body a testament to a pagan ritual. But the Reverend's praise had an edge. He would often preach against the heathen savages who lived in the hills, warning his flock about their dark magic and devil worship. Elena felt his eyes on her, and she wondered if he suspected something, if he saw something in her that didn't belong in his clean, righteous world. The baby was born on a cold autumn night after a long and difficult labor. He was perfect. He had a shock of dark hair, but his eyes, His eyes were Elena's, sapphire blue. When the doctor placed the baby in Thomas's arms, the man wept. All the lies, all the pain, all the fear melted away in that moment. He looked at the child and saw only his son. Samuel, Thomas whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. It means God has heard. Because he has, Elena. He's heard our prayers. Elena's heart ached. She looked at her beautiful baby boy, and then at her husband, his face radiant with a joy he didn't deserve, in a future he might not have. The prophecy had not yet come to pass, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to her core, that the bill would come due. This happiness was borrowed, and the price was going to be terrible. What she didn't realize was that the price wouldn't be what she expected, and the lie the prophecy spoke of wasn't Thomas's. It was Ka's. Years passed, little Samuel grew, and the town of Cedar Ridge seemed to forget its initial whispers. He was a charming, bright boy, beloved by all. He had his mother's eyes and his father's kind temperament. Thomas adored him, teaching him the business of the general store, his past sins seemingly washed clean by his paternal devotion. But Samuel was different. He had a stillness about him, an unnerving wisdom in his blue eyes. He spent hours in the woods, perfectly at home, and seemed to understand the language of the birds and the animals. He could calm the most skittish horse with a touch and a murmured word. The townsfolk called it a gift, a sign of his blessed birth. Elena knew it was the Apache blood singing in his veins, and it terrified her. Reverend Miller watched the boy with a growing suspicion. He saw the way Samuel would stare at the sky, as if listening to something no one else could hear. He saw the way nature seemed to bend to the boy's will. The Reverend didn't see a gift from God. He saw something unnatural, something unholy. One Sunday, during a sermon on the dangers of false idols and witchcraft, the Reverend stared directly at the Whitmore family. "The devil can wear a beautiful mask," he thundered from the pulpit. "He can come to us disguised as a miracle, as an answer to our prayers. But a tainted well can only bring forth bitter water." The implication was clear. A chill went through the congregation. The old whispers started again, this time laced with something darker than gossip. Fear. Elena felt the walls closing in. The peaceful life she had built was a house of cards, and the Reverend was determined to blow it down. She thought of the prophecy, the life of the one who tells the first lie. She had assumed it was about Thomas. But what if it wasn't? What if the first lie wasn't about who was barren? What if it was about the prophecy itself? Her blood ran cold. Ka had told her the child would bring peace. But what if that was the lie? What if Samuel's destiny was something else entirely? The tension in the town grew, fanned by the Reverend's fiery sermons. People started crossing the street to avoid Elena. Children were told not to play with Samuel, the strange boy. Thomas tried to ignore it, his face set in a stubborn denial. But the poison was seeping in. The breaking point came during a town picnic. A young girl, the daughter of one of the Reverend's most devout followers, fell into the swift-moving creek. She was swept away by the current, her screams lost in the roar of the water. Panic erupted. Men ran along the bank, helpless. But 7-year-old Samuel did not panic. He simply walked to the edge of the creek, closed his eyes, and held out a hand. He whispered something in a language no one understood, and the creek diverted. For a few impossible seconds, the powerful current split, flowing around a sandbar where the little girl had washed up, sputtering and terrified but alive. The water formed a clear, dry path directly to her. Samuel walked across, took her hand, and led her back to the stunned crowd. As soon as they were safe, he closed his eyes again, and the creek slammed back into its original course with a deafening roar. Silence. Not a sound from the 50 people who had just witnessed a boy bend a river to his will. They didn't look at him with awe or gratitude. They looked at him with terror. Reverend Miller stepped forward, his face pale, his eyes blazing with a righteous fury. He pointed a trembling finger at the boy. "Witchcraft!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "This is not the work of God. This is the work of the devil. This child is an abomination." And just like that, the fuse was lit. The fear the Reverend had so carefully cultivated exploded into a raging fire. That night they came for him, a mob led by the Reverend, carrying torches and ropes. They surrounded the Whitmores' small house, their faces twisted into masks of hate in the flickering light. "Bring out the witch child," the Reverend bellowed. "We will cleanse this town of its evil." Inside, Thomas stood with his rifle, his face grim. Elena clutched Samuel, who was strangely calm. "It's the prophecy," she whispered to Thomas, her voice shaking. "It's happening." Thomas looked at her, his eyes filled with a terrible resolve. "Then let it happen," he said. He unbolted the door and stepped out onto the porch to face the mob. "This is my son," he yelled, his voice ringing with authority. "And you will not harm him." "He is not your son, Whitmore," the Reverend spat. "He is the product of a devil's bargain. We all know your wife was barren for years. This is not a miracle. It is a curse." Thomas took a deep breath, preparing to shout the lie he had lived with for so long, to claim the boy as his own blood. But before he could speak, another voice cut through the night, a voice that hadn't been heard in Cedar Ridge for 7 years. "He is right," the voice said. "Samuel is not Thomas's son." The crowd parted, and there, standing at the edge of the torchlight, was K.A. Strongbear. He was older, his face leaner, but his eyes held the same ancient power. "He is not Thomas's son," K.A. repeated, his gaze sweeping over the terrified faces of the mob. "He is mine." The confession hung in the air, thick and shocking. The mob, which had been a single-minded beast of rage, faltered. This changed the narrative. This wasn't just about a strange child, it was about adultery, a sin they could understand. Reverend Miller seized the opportunity. "So, you admit it," he crowed, pointing a triumphant finger at Elena, who had appeared in the doorway. "The harlot and the heathen. This child was born of sin." "He was born of a promise," K.A. corrected, his voice cutting through the noise like a razor. He took a step forward, and the mob instinctively shuffled back. His presence was overwhelming. "And you, preacher, know all about promises and lies." The Reverend paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" K.A.'s voice was dangerously soft. He turned to the crowd. "This man speaks of miracles and devils. Let me tell you a story. 8 years ago, there was an Apache camp a day's ride from here. A peaceful camp. My wife, my daughter, my family." His voice cracked for a moment, a glimpse of the profound grief he carried. "A group of men from this territory, drunk on whiskey and self-righteousness, rode into that camp. They said we had stolen cattle. It was a lie, but it was the excuse they needed." He locked his eyes on Reverend Miller. "They burned our homes. They murdered women and children. And the man who led them, the man who held the torch and quoted scripture as he did his killing, was this man, your holy man. He was just a prospector then, before he found God and a new name." A wave of disbelief and horror rippled through the crowd. They looked from Kaya's grief-stricken, furious face to the Reverend's, which was now ashen. "Lies!" the Reverend sputtered. "The ravings of a savage." "My wife was a seer," K.A. continued, his voice growing stronger. "Before she died, she had one last vision. She saw that our bloodline would not end. She saw a child, born of our blood and the blood of an innocent, who would grow up to expose the man who destroyed us. She saw this very night." Suddenly it all made sense to Elena. The prophecy, the choice, it was never about a child of peace. It was about justice. It was about vengeance. "The prophecy you told me," Elena whispered, stepping onto the porch, "about the one who tells the first lie." K.A. looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful regret. "I did not lie, Elena. I simply did not tell you the whole truth. The prophecy said the path would be cleared by revealing the first lie, the lie that started everything, the preacher's lie about the stolen cattle. That was the first lie." Then Thomas Whitmore did the bravest thing he had ever done. He stepped forward, standing between K.A. and the Reverend. He faced his neighbors, the people he had known his whole life. "This man speaks the truth," Thomas said, his voice shaking but clear. "But he is not the only one who has been hiding a secret. The Reverend is right about one thing. Samuel is not my blood, but it's not because of my wife." He took a deep breath, and finally, after 7 long years, he spoke the truth that had poisoned his soul. "It is because I am barren. I am the one who could not give my wife a child. I was a coward, and I was ashamed, and I let her carry my burden. She did what she did out of a desperate love, a love I was not man enough to deserve. This boy, Samuel, is more my son than any child of my own blood could ever be. He is the son of my heart." The raw honesty of his confession stunned the crowd into silence. The foundations of their judgment crumbled. They had condemned a woman who had been lied to by her husband, and they were being led by a man who was a murderer. The mob was no longer a mob. It was just a group of ashamed, confused people. They began to lower their torches, to look away from the house, to melt back into the darkness from which they came, leaving the Reverend alone and exposed. Justice had arrived, not with a gun or a knife, but with the devastating power of the truth. The preacher's reign of fear was over. He was driven from the town the next day, a disgraced man with a past he could no longer outrun. In the quiet aftermath, K.A. stood with Elena and Thomas on their porch. The moon, the same moon that had witnessed Samuel's conception, shone down on them. "My purpose is fulfilled," K.A. said. He looked at Samuel, who was now standing beside Elena, his small hand in hers. There was so much love in K.A.'s eyes, so much pain. "He is a fine boy. You have raised him well. Will you stay?" Elena asked, her heart aching for this man who had sacrificed everything. He shook his head. "My promise was to disappear. He is your son. He was always meant to be your son." He knelt down so he was eye to eye with Samuel. He placed a hand on the boy's chest. "You have 2 bloods in you, the blood of a brave woman and the blood of a proud people. Honor them both. Live in peace." He stood, gave one last, long look at the family he had created, but could never be a part of. And then he turned and walked away, vanishing into the night just as he had appeared 7 years before. Elena, Thomas, and Samuel stood on the porch, no longer a family built on secrets and lies, but one forged in truth and forgiveness. The air was clear. The whispers were gone. They had faced the fire and had not been burned. They were whole. Sometimes the greatest miracles aren't the ones that come easily. They are the ones that demand we break, so we can be put back together, stronger than before. This story forces us to ask some hard questions, doesn't it? Was Elena's choice an act of betrayal or one of incredible faith? Faced with years of shame and a lie that cut to the core of her being, what would you have done? Can you forgive Thomas for his deception, or was his final act of courage enough to redeem him? And what about K.A.'s plan, a 7-year quest for justice, using a prophecy and an innocent woman to achieve it? Was it a righteous path, or was he just as guilty of manipulation as the man he sought to expose? These are the questions that dig deep into what we believe about love, sacrifice, and the long, winding road to justice. If this story of impossible choices in a family forged in fire moved you, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. We share stories like this every week that challenge the heart and make you think. And give this video a like if you believe that sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon we have. Let me know in the comments below. Who was the true hero of this story? Elena, Thomas, or K.A.? There's no right answer, and I'm genuinely curious to hear what you think. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next story.